far enough in a sense. I'll let Jacoby go a little bit deeper on that. But this whole thing, I just think about how activists who are on the police accountability side really talk heavily about how they feel like we're in a system where we're overly reliant on policing, and that we have created systems now where when we've had these migrants come in, these asylum seekers, they've had to stay in police stations and stuff like that. And so when we have a system so reliant on policing, critics argue things like this, it's open to happen, right? Because we haven't created real, reliable systems of care for people, rather systems of policing and accountability. So I think this just is a representation of that, and I think it's really sickening. I mean, the moment I saw it, I'm just like disgusted to even hear that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes out of it, because this is some really grave and serious stuff here.
It's interesting you talk about police language, and Jacoby, I want to ask you about that because it's a discussion we were having before the show, which is the language we're using. I saw news outlets getting some criticism about the way they were writing about this, talking about it, alleged improper sexual relations, impregnating a teenage girl. And I'll say as a reporter, it's really important to be careful about things. I think it's really important as a reporter to call something what it is and be as clear as you possibly can when you're writing or talking about something. But it's also important to be very careful, especially early on in something like this. I mean, let's be clear. The allegation is that an officer impregnated a teenage girl. We don't know anything more about that. We don't know if an officer had sex with a young girl who was under the age of consent. That is rape. I want to be clear about that language. We just don't know a lot yet. And so I wonder, Jacoby, if I could ask you to follow up on what Brandon was talking about here, that apparently you two were talking about already, about sort of the language that's being used around this.
First, I want to speak to what Brandon was saying. Without systems of care, vulnerable people are left to be exploited. They are left without cover, without justice for potential acts of violence. And even if these allegations are found to be untrue, thousands of migrants remain vulnerable in this city to sexual violence, to harassment. But when we're talking about the language that's being used, sure, I understand people want to be careful, but it seems that the word alleged does a lot of that. And it seems like what we're dealing with is alleged rape, alleged sexual coercion, potentially, because these migrants were, again, vulnerable individuals under the care of the places of shelter and the places of refuge that they were able to find across the city of Chicago, which still needs to be held accountable for the lack of those places and sites of care. But from the allegations that I'm reading, it seems that I think we should be calling these allegations potential rape and sexual coercion versus improper sexual relations. I'm not sure who is trying to be protected in that sort of particular framing of the incident. And I hope if these allegations are found to be true that, this isn't just a situation of the police investigating themselves and so slaps on the wrist are handed out.
And also, using sanitized language like that just kind of continues what these migrants have gone through already in these last, almost year since Republican governors, especially Greg Abbott of Texas, has been sending these people here. Their humanity has been erased because they've just been treated as political pawns. They are bussed here, and because we have a shortage of housing, and because these bureaucratic systems, they work very slowly. They have been sleeping in police station. That is really, it's really, really upsetting that these people they've traveled thousands of miles, they were coerced into these situations, and then when they get here, they are mistreated like this, allegedly.
Yeah, and we're gonna obviously we've got reporters now working on this story, trying to get more information. We're gonna keep following the story and reporting on these allegations, including alleged sex with a teenager. As I talked about, we heard from Deputy Mayor Gary and Gatewood. A statement from Mayor Brandon Johnson said that the city takes these allegations seriously, as well as the care and well-being of all residents and new arrivals. But they're deferring to we got to wait for the investigation to take place, which I think makes some sense. Hannah, are we hearing anything from state lawmakers or the governor?
During the news break, we heard from Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, who said this alleged behavior is completely unacceptable. This morning, I made sure Governor Pritzker did a press conference in Springfield, so I asked some of our Springfield-based reporter colleagues to make sure he was asked, and he said, obviously it's horrific that people are taking advantage of, but he also pointed to, we are, trying to find people more permanent shelter. make sure that people get rental assistance. But again, these things take a lot of time, and we have a housing shortage, all over the place. It's going to take a long time. Representative Kelly Cassidy, a state rep from the Rogers Park area, said this is horrifying. So investigation better be swift, thorough, transparent. So I expect that we're going to hear more, but this is not a story that should be swept under the rug at all.
No, this idea of permanent, more suitable housing. I wonder, Brandon, these allegations, which is all we know so far is that these allegations are out there. Do you think these allegations are going to force the city to rethink housing migrants at police stations at all?
Absolutely. But I think the challenge here is just a logistical challenge, right? Because what spaces do we have to do that can handle that? The city's working, trying to find spaces as we speak, because it seems like all they had when people came in were the police stations. But this right here has to raise alarm and say, we got to find better systems here, better locations here that are going to be safer for these asylum seekers coming in. It's just sleeping on any type of floor of a lobby. Yeah. It's just inhumane, right? Whether it's a police station, a hospital, it just isn't right. You want to find a place that's at least comfortable to a degree, right?
I want to turn now to another heavy but important story. The 4th of July took on a different meaning for North Suburban Highland Park this year. Yeah. 1 year after a mass shooting left 7 dead and 48 injured. Brandon, I'll stay with you. I mean, how did the community mark this tragedy?
Yeah, look, you can only imagine the raw emotions, especially for those who are from Highland Park, who were at that parade a year ago, to experience that type of terror. I can't even imagine. So really, in a real big show of strength, hundreds of community members, they all wore blue. They talked about Highland Strong. And they had a remembrance ceremony at City Hall. They also had a community picnic. And many of them talked about trying to reclaim the parade route, and not let, this hateful person that came in, define this stretch and define this day for them, in a sense. They skipped the fireworks. Fireworks tend to be a little more of a jovial thing, but they opted for something that was kind of cool. It was a drone light show. To kind of show some more reverence and respect to those lives that were lost and wounded. And you had local artists perform as well. But I think it's important to say the names of the people who passed away in that tragedy: Nicholas Toledo, Katie Goldstein, Irina McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy, Stephen Strauss, Jackie Sunheim, and Eduardo Uvaldo. Those are the lives, the 7 people that were taken in that. And emotion still very heavy, as the mayor, Nancy Rodering, and activists there are working actively, trying to get more attention on gun safety reform and legislation, and this really adding more urgency to that. But it was a solemn day, but also sort of a inspiring day too, to see a community come together like that, grieving, hugging, and helping each other through a painful time.
I appreciate you for saying those names. I think that is most important, that we're centering the families that were most affected by this tragedy. Illinois' 2 U.S. senators and Governor J.B. Pritzker joined the residents of Highland Park to remember the lives lost. I want to listen to a little bit of what the governor had to say.
We passed laws in Illinois to keep people safe because people from Highland Park and all over the state got together to make the message clear to the General Assembly that we need stronger gun laws.
Hannah, can you get us up to speed about where Illinois is a year after this massacre in terms of new gun control legislation?
Right. So in January, the outgoing lame duck General Assembly Democrats, they pushed through this major ban on assault weapons. Illinois is not the first state to do this, but this law that bans, I want to say, 75, 85 types of different assault-style weapons, high-capacity magazines. This law is now tied up in federal courts. There was recently oral arguments on appeal at the Seventh Circuit, and this might even wind up at the U.S. Supreme Court. If there's, of course, gun rights activists are always looking for the kind of perfect test case. And, of course, with the conservative majority Supreme Court, they're looking to strengthen the Second Amendment even more. So that's tied up. But I want to highlight some reporting from the Chicago Tribune. Our friends there dug into the data to try to understand what impact Illinois' existing red flag law and clear and present danger law had after the Highland Park shooting. Because, I've reported on Springfield for a decade now, and like so many laws passed there, a lack of public information campaign really hampers their effectiveness if no one knows about a program or a law. So in the 8-9 months between early August of last year and until May, county judges all over Illinois granted 146 orders to take away guns from people considered a threat to themselves or others. That's nearly triple the rate at which judges had granted those orders in the first 3.5 years of Illinois' red flag law. What we don't have good data on is how many red flag petitions were made but are pending or were denied, just given the fragmented nature of having 102 separate siloed county court systems in Illinois. But the shooter, he actually was not subject to a red flag complaint, but before he got his FOID card in late 2019, Highland Park Police had actually filed what's known as a clear and present danger report on him after he threatened suicide and murder. But the state police kind of voided that report since at the time he didn't have an application for a FOID card. State police have since changed the protocol since that was kind of came to the surface after the shooting, and now they're retaining those clear and present danger reports, so they have them on file. And the Tribune found that in the approximately 10 months between last year's shooting and the end of May, state police received nearly 12,000 clear and present danger reports, which resulted in more than 5,000 FOID cards being revoked or applications being denied.
Wow.
More than double the number of the previous year.
I appreciate that breakdown. I mean, we're talking. That was a thing that came out after the shooting. This discussion of the laws we already have on the books. Are there ways they could have prevented this? I do think it's worth pointing out. As you mentioned, those red flag laws. You can have someone's FOID card revoked. But as we've reported on here multiple times at WBEZ, even when someone gets their FOID card revoked, that doesn't mean that anybody ever goes to get their guns or gets their card. So there's a lot of loopholes in the system. I've spoken with Brendan Kelly, who's the head of the state police. I believe that they are focused on this issue, but at the same time, as I was saying, there's just a lot of gaps in this system. I wonder, Jacoby, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think the same way when it comes to sort of gun regulation is, even if you ban certain types of guns, there are already so many in circulation. We already are living in a city that has rampant illegal guns flowing into the city. And what we know is when human beings can't get their hands on something they want, an illicit black market thrives in that space. And there's already one thriving for guns. And so that I think why we should continue to push towards these legislation and while these numbers around red flag laws are, something to be, somewhat optimistic about. I am wondering just how far will legislation go? And by the time Illinois' assault weapon ban comes back to us, what will it look like?
If you're just joining us, this is Reset. I'm Patrick Smith, in for Sasha-Ann Simons. We're breaking down the biggest stories of the week with a panel of first-rate journalists. That was Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago. We've also got Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois and Brandon Prope of CW26 and WBEZ's Making Podcast. Also, don't forget that you can watch our news recap live on WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. You can leave us a comment or question or talk to us in the YouTube chat box, and I may just read what you have to say about these stories on the air. We've been talking about some heavy topics. They're important topics. I'm glad we're covering them. I want to turn to potentially lighter, maybe louder news, which is that plenty of people throughout the city and suburbs were celebrating this 4th of July weekend. Some might say a little too much. The city received thousands of fireworks complaints. Did you all hear fireworks in your neighborhood?
Plenty.
Come on. What are you talking about?
For days. Numerous days.
So Illinois is one of only 3 states where fireworks are actually illegal. But that obviously, as we're hearing, that
Ain't
did not stop people.
nobody.
As all of you heard out there, it didn't stop anybody. Fireworks were unfortunately to blame for several garage fires on the southwest side. Brandon, it seems like we get some version of this story every year, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting this year, it's rare that you have the fire department take policy stances, but the Chicago Fire Department has come out and been like, hey, now, y'all talking about legalizing fireworks? That's a no for us. Absolutely not. No. And I get it. They received, they say, over 300 calls in a 24-hour period, and 14 of them were fire investigations, and 8 of them involved fireworks. That's a pretty steep number. And these garage fires on the southwest side, I mean, that's a large swath. 6 garage fires there. Half of them they estimate were sparked by fireworks. No serious injuries reported, but people really are unsafe when it comes. We've seen viral videos of people.
We have.
Back off, Terry. Watch out, Terry. You know what I'm talking about. But these things can turn really, really bad really, really quick. So it's just interesting seeing CFD take a stand and be like, hey, now, hold the brakes, pump them. Let's not legalize this now. Come on.
I remember when Jason Pierre-Paul lost his hand.
That
in
was
a
one
fireworks
too.
accident.
Yeah.
Giants defensive
I
end.
saw one. Somebody threw one in a car in like Atlanta.
Oh, my
I
God.
watched as I was driving home somebody throw one into a JJ's Fish. Like,
What?
open the door, throw it in, and then they took off. And I'm going to just keep it real
Now,
with
what
you.
did JJ's do
I'm
to
going to
folk?
just keep it real with you.
Yeah.
I grew up in Altgale Gardens with my friends, throwing fireworks, making sure trash cans weren't in their best condition when we got done with them.
Oh, my God.
There was a rite of passage about going across state lines, not just for gas,
Right.
but for getting fireworks. And so in some parts, if Illinois lawmakers are going to say, hey, money is leaving Illinois, we should get paid off this, we should have fireworks, I wonder if we could start thinking systemically about this. All right, if this is coming down the pike, how do we build systems where the fire department, people in communities know they don't have to just do these illegal fireworks shows under the cover of night in their park, in their alleys. Maybe there could be more coordination with your local fire department. Maybe there's more coordination with your local park. Maybe there's more city efforts at not sort of being reactive to, can we spot where the illegal fireworks shows are happening? And in many cases, like up in Lincoln Square, the same place they happen every single year, but how can we participate more? And it sounds like 40th Ward Alderperson Andre Vasquez, who I've had on CityCast recently, he kind of wants to do something like that, where they have a city-led or partnered initiative in bringing a fireworks show to the neighborhood, while also listening to neighbors who, rightfully, between their pets, their own desires for noise in the neighborhood, even trauma of some of their family members, don't want to hear fireworks just going off. So can we potentially be more coordinated? Because obviously people like them.
And can we have more awareness? Can there be a better campaign to get people more knowledgeable about how to handle these things? Because part of the issue, too, is you think it's kind of easy.
Yeah.
And then stuff starts popping up.
Right.
No, I saw one show let off all of their fireworks at the same time
Well,
in a
what's
matter
the
of like
point of that?
25 seconds. It was an accident. And so
Oh, no.
even the big shows can go awry.
Yeah. All right. I gotta stop us here just for a minute, though. You're listening to Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago, Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois, and Brandon Pope of CW26 and WBEZ's Making podcast. We're just getting started. Stick around for more. But first, a man is sentenced for killing nearly 24 people at a Walmart in Texas. Here's Lisa with more.
Patrick, this white gunman killed 23 people in a racist attack on Hispanic shoppers at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas in 2019, and now he's been sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences in federal prison. Texas prosecutors also want him to get the death penalty when he stands trial in state court, but that trial date has not been set. The Republican Attorney General in Kansas is asking a state court to block transgender residents in Kansas from changing their sex that's listed on their driver's licenses. The lawsuit was filed today by Attorney General Chris Kobach. Kobach is seeking an order in district court to stop agencies from allowing changes to transgender people's licenses. Top-seeded man, this is at Wimbledon, top-seeded Carlos Alcaraz and second-seeded women's player Ariana Sabalenka both won on day 5. Top seed women Iga Swiatek and second seed man Novak Djokovic should be on the court soon. Alcaraz advanced to the third round for the second straight year by beating Andre Muller in 3 straight sets. You're listening to WBEZ.
I'm Peter Sagal. On this week's Wait, we're bringing together people with particular skills, Mariska Hargitay, Martha Stewart, and George Takei, to go on one last mission, which is to amuse you. Join us for an A-Team news quiz from NPR. Saturday morning at 10 on WBEZ.
Wherever news is breaking,
NPR News, Beirut.
NPR News, Mexico City.
NPR News, Paris.
the NPR newscast takes you there. Listen live every hour on the hour.
Here at 91.5 WBEZ Chicago.
Summer in Chicago is busy, and it can be hard to figure out what to do. Introducing WBEZ's Summer Guide, a listing of more than 250 activities in and around the city. Find out more at wbez.org/summer.
WBEZ is supported by the Cleve Carney Museum of Art, presenting Warhol, an exhibition featuring over 200 Andy Warhol works, plus interactive exhibits and more. Learn more at warhol2023.org. Weather forecast, it's pretty glorious out there. Sunny skies, getting to a high of 82 degrees, slightly cooler at the lake. Cloudy tonight, more rain, showers and thunderstorms overnight, a low of 64. Saturday looks like a rainy day, and the nicer day of the weekend, Sunday, with a high, sunny skies on Sunday with a high of 81 degrees. It is 12:28 right now. We've got 76 degrees at O'Hare. I'm Lisa Labus. You're listening to WBEZ.
Back now with more Reset and more of the weekly news recap. I'm Patrick Smith, in for Sasha-Ann Simons. With us is a panel of world-class journalists diving deeper into the week's state and local stories. Before the break, we got into the latest on what was happening around the city and suburbs over the 4th of July holiday, but there's more news to get to about that weekend.
Heavy rain flooded Chicago streets and homes with up to 9 inches of rain falling in parts of the metro area on Sunday.
Basements filled with several feet of water from yesterday's record rainfall.
Cicero, one of the hardest hit areas, soaked with more than 8 inches of rain.
Officials are advising residents to report damage to 311 so the city can send accurate cost estimates to the state and federal government. They're hoping to provide low-interest loans to residents.
The water also forced NASCAR officials to cancel the last half of an Xfinity Series race.
At the table with me today is Brandon Pope, reporter and anchor at CW26 and host of WBEZ's Making podcast, Hannah Meisel, state government and politics reporter for Capital News Illinois, and Jacoby Cochran, host of the daily podcast and newsletter, CityCast Chicago. Don't forget that you can also watch the weekly news recap right now on the WBEZ Facebook and WBEZ YouTube pages. As you just heard, one of the heaviest rainfalls in Chicago history put a damper on NASCAR's first ever street race, which was here in downtown Chicago. So the broadcast averaged more than 4.8 million viewers, NASCAR's most watched race in 6 years. Any of you watch it on a screen?
No.
Technically,
phone screen. Yeah. It was on my hand.
I saw some Twitter clips and some nice
TikTok clips.
Yeah.
Jacoby, you describe yourself as a NASCAR hater, is that right?
I describe myself as someone who hated on the NASCAR implementation strategy, everything from when it was announced last year up through. And I've read the coverage, and I understand that, NASCAR is being lauded for its community outreach and for paying for it and for, even some of its teardown processes. But I'm not going to lie, I was giggling over the weekend when the rain came in, mostly because we hadn't really had any rain, but then we had like events stopping rain. And the reason I think it was important for people who had a problem with NASCAR to hate on it is because, let's be honest, how much was the national audience really going to hear what local Chicagoans felt, what their drive was like, right? What their access to parks was like, what their weekend plans, how they were changed when, NASCAR was going to have ESPN, the New York Times, and all these national media talking about this legendary street race. I thought it was okay for people to vent and get out their frustration, especially considering this is like a 3-year contract. So it's not like this was a one and done. It's probably going to happen again.
Yeah, I want to dive into that. I mean, the TV broadcast, it showed some beautiful shots of our city and lakefront. But, we're hearing criticism from Jacoby. There's road rage over street closures. Hannah, I wonder you first. Was this worth it for the city?
Oh, God. I think we have to wait for some final numbers to come out. But just in terms of a cultural fit, it doesn't seem like a cultural fit to me. That being said, raising our national profile, of course, Chicago, especially nationally, is talked about in a certain way. And, we want to change that. I think everyone who has a stake in the city of Chicago's well-being wants Chicago to be talked about in a more positive way. But, I think like Jacoby was saying, actually reaching out to communities that are going to be affected by the traffic and the lack of access to, Grant Park for weeks and weeks on end, because Grant Park's also, I think a few months ago, our colleague Heather Sharon at WTTW, she reported that of all the, summer days in Chicago, I think maybe 2 or 3 were actually going to be clear of any sort of event. And, that is not great for a park that's supposed to be everybody's park, everybody's backyard.
Hey, I saw some people talking about that Grant Park is less of a park and more of like a major event space.
Truly. Feels like a fairgrounds.
What do you think, Brandon? I mean, was it worth it?
We got to see the numbers, right? But honestly, I started out on Jacoby's side. I started out being a big-time 10 toes down hater. Then I got to a point, all the hate was just like really overwhelming. I'm like, y'all, come on, let's just sit back for a minute and realize. You know what sold me? Okay, the rain started to break a little bit, and you see these skyline shots of those cars. See these shots of the cars driving around. And you got Chicago traffic in the background. Like, it looked
Get
cool.
a drone. Get a drone or
but listen,
something.
Here's the thing. To what Hannah was saying, though, Chicago is a top-tier city, and so I think it's a big deal that we are even given an opportunity or looked at it as a place to have something like this. The Midwest has racing culture. Illinois has racing culture. It wasn't too long ago NASCAR was hosted in Joliet, right? Mm-hmm. So to bring it to downtown Chicago, NASCAR's goal was to try to expand their reach. So if you just stay in the South and just stay racing in North Carolina and Alabama, it doesn't really do much to expand your reach or grow the sport. I would bet you with all the outreach they did, and I've kind of heard this from people too, on the south side of Chicago at the Bubba's Block Party at DuSable, you've got some people that are now a little more interested in NASCAR, piqued their interest a bit. And if this, let's see, next year, maybe the weather's better. They need to lower the ticket costs. I'll tell you that. Yeah. The ticket, we saw a lot of empty seats in the stands. I think part of that was the weather, but the other part was it's like $200, $300 a ticket. So bring those costs down so that everyday people can go to it, just like a Sox game costs maybe $50. Give us some lower cost options, and I think you could see this grow even more. But I think for the first time around with all the rain and weather, I think it was a success optically for Chicago.
Yeah. So NASCAR,
optically,
as
Jacoby, I don't care about these optics, man.
Jacoby's like, okay, there were some nice shots on TV. I need more than that. Well, as Jacoby was talking about, NASCAR's contract with Chicago is through 2025.
It's a terrible contract, if I'm going to be honest.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Either side can decide not to go forward with another race over the next 2 years. Do you think NASCAR or the city of Chicago are going to greenlight this again next year?
I think they will.
Yeah.
I think they will. One, because the weather didn't really give it a fair shot. I think that we could try this again. Hopefully the weather's better. I'm sure it will be because it's hard to be worse than what we got. Okay. See if these concerts work out this time, right? Like they had a whole thing planned, and a lot of that just literally the parade got rained on. So let's try it again. I think Brandon Johnson's, he's a sports guy. I think he's open to it. They may need to re-look at some of the terms because the fact that it's actually bringing it in less than Lollapalooza would, it's kind of like, why'd you even strike that deal?
Yeah.
But I think it's worth trying again.
Speaking of, two aldermen want an independent cost-benefit analysis done before agreeing to host again.
Yeah. Jacoby,
do you think that makes sense?
Of course. I think we need to figure out logistically what is the best way to go forward from construction to cost. Sure, there were some great shots. The museum looked cool. The skyline looked cool. But this idea of sort of challenging conservative narratives through, capitulating to the activities that they like seems very anti-Chicago to me. It seems very kind of weak sauce to me. Like, if that's how you feel about us, that's how you feel about us. Like, racing cars in the streets, I don't think it's going to change that for anybody. Oh, Chicago's downtown is beautiful. We've been knew that. We've been telling you that. What did you learn?
I think it's more than just conservative narratives, though. I just think it's narratives overall. People flippantly joke about Chicago being, it's a dangerous place to be, whether they're conservative or liberal or whatever. I just think the more that we put ourselves in the spotlight and show that we have more to offer than this war zone narrative, I think it's better for everybody.
Whose narrative is that, though? That's
truly it's a conservative-driven narrative,
right?
But I think that other people play into that as well that aren't conservative. You know what I'm saying?
And Grant Park is not the emblem of that. So through NASCAR coming here, sitting outside of the museum and around Buckingham. No, I don't want it on the south side.
Yeah,
I'm just saying. Do narratives change being in Grant Park?
That's a worthy question. It's a
good question. Although I think to Brandon's point, for like Fox News grandpas who are like convinced that this city is constantly on fire, maybe this was a chance to show.
I saw nothing on fire.
Yeah, not until a couple days later when the fireworks were going off.
Exactly.
Hannah, sorry, I cut you off. I think.
I also think we'd be remiss to not mention the fact that the Taste of Chicago was postponed until September to accommodate this. And personally, I haven't been to the Taste in at least a decade, but I know it's a big draw for families, and postponing it to September when school's already started is kind of a bummer for people who make this a yearly tradition.
Yeah, the Taste of Chicago is iconic. Jacoby, do you go? Are you concerned about that part of this, the change in the date?
I have enjoyed the local tastes that have been going on since the pandemic took hold, and so I think we've been as a city pretty smart and innovative about trying new things there. And so I wasn't as concerned with the Taste being moved because I knew we were going to have those more local events.
If you're just joining us, this is Reset. I'm Patrick Smith in for Sasha-Ann Simons. We're breaking down the biggest stories of the week with a panel of journalists: Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago, Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois, and Brandon Pope of CW26 and WBEZ's Making podcast. Don't forget that you can watch our news recap live on WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube pages. You can leave us a comment or question or talk to us in the YouTube chat box, and I may just read what you have to say about these stories on air. So, as the rain was postponing NASCAR downtown, Chicago's 311 was receiving a record number of reports of basement flooding, particularly on the west and northwest sides. I got flooding. Did any of you guys get flooding in your basement?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, man. I didn't.
No.
I did not.
No.
All right. Well, I'm happy for you guys. Although I didn't call through.
He was hoping for some empathy there.
Yeah, I was like, oh, well, good for you
today.
guys, I guess. I'm the only jerk here dealing with that. So I didn't actually call 311 about my flooding, so I wasn't part of this data, but there were more than 2,000 complaints of flooding to 311, more than 9 inches of rain. I'm going to be dealing for weeks with trying to make sure I don't have mold in my basement. But anyway, that's a me problem, not a problem for any of you guys out there, although it sounds like a lot of people are dealing with that. In the suburbs, Cicero got 9 inches of water, and officials declared the west suburban town a disaster area. They also criticized the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District for prioritizing Chicago neighborhoods over the suburbs. I'll say we had somebody from the MWRD on yesterday who said, hey, we've been criticized the other way where the city says you're not prioritizing us. And he says that's not how it works. You know, obviously they're going to say that. I'm not saying I don't believe them, but I just mean they're not going to say, yeah, we did it. Screw you, Cicero. Jacoby, do you think Cicero has a point?
I mean, anybody who is sort of at this point dealing with massive flooding in their town is going to want to point the fingers at somewhere. And I think it's another reason why we sort of hate on big events and things that take up attention is because, you know, while the front pages are talking about NASCAR, thousands of people are dealing with, you know, wondering, is Illinois' water infrastructure ready for this type of rain? Because it seems we keep finding ourselves flat-footed here to the point where for the first time in 3 years, they had to reverse the flow of the river into Lake Michigan to relieve some of this water. You know, we've talked to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District because I needed to know what does the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District do? And now that I know, it's about anything that has to do with Chicago's waterways and making sure that they're safe, that they're healthy, that they flow correctly. And I know that they're dealing with a monumental task and trying to provide relief across Illinois. And so I understand where Cicero is coming from. And my hope is that families can find relief. But also for anyone dealing with flooding, you should definitely be checking out what are some things to do to protect your home, what should you do with damaged property, but also how you should be interacting with that flow water, which can be filled with all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, climate and environmental justice are kind of quiet crises right now that people need to be paying more attention to. And Mayor Brandon Johnson partially ran on, so we got to see what he's going to do when it comes to this. But the fact that the South and West Side in particular were most impacted by this flooding really speaks to what this issue really is, right? It's creating more divides. The climate crisis is the climate crisis, and it's impacting everybody. We've already, what does they say? This is the third hottest day ever in America, in the world.
This week.
And this week.
A couple days this week, the hottest in the world.
Right.
Which is just wild.
Isn't that crazy? So something's got to be done. We got to stop pushing these climate and environmental issues as just passive issues. We've got to be more active about it.
Yeah, Hannah, what do you think? I mean, we see, you know, this came, this torrential downpour came when we had one of the driest Junes. We had just had this world's worst air quality because of the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. Then we get the downpour. What scientists are saying is we should expect more sort of extreme weather events. Is this the sort of thing that's going to make people take this more seriously and say, oh, yeah, like I knew climate change was real, but now I know we got to act? Or I've heard people express the other concern where we're going to go straight from sort of denialism to hopelessness and just say, look, it's horrible. We just got to move on.
I mean, yes, I've heard definitely both. I think that we're in this window of time where we can still do something, but we don't know when that window will close. And honestly, more than likely, it'll be sooner than we are prepared for. But we're in this window right now. And the thing about it is our infrastructure is aging. This is something that takes a lot of money. But, cities, suburbs, whatever, that to deal with aging infrastructure, it takes money and more than likely takes property taxes, being raised or money moved around. And that is a hard sell in Illinois. Of course, we have the second highest property taxes behind New Jersey. Property taxes are something that is very visceral because you get an envelope twice a year. You got to pay them. Unlike an income tax where it, for the most part, if you're employed somewhere, it automatically comes out of your paycheck. Other taxes you pay right at the store. It's on your receipt, but you don't really feel it. And so the way that Illinois has, for years, structured its entire tax system, it just makes it, unfortunately, a harder sell. But again, it needs money to deal with it, and it needs very smart planning, and it needs to be done in a way where certain communities aren't left behind, because these climate crisis areas across the globe, they are more likely to affect countries, cities, states, where historically people have been under-resourced.
Yeah.
And something that's not getting a lot of urgency either, lead pipes. Chicago got a lot of old lead pipes. We talk about Flint and the water crisis there. The longer we wait, the more we move closer to that. So that's another
talk about
thing.
that any day.
Yeah, man.
About that
It's bad.
As you're all saying, there's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to be done, especially with the changing climate.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. Stick around because there's still more news to cover. We've got Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago, Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois, and Brandon Pope of CW26 and WBEZ's Making podcast. And as we were just discussing, hottest temperature on record. Here's Lisa with more.
Yeah, sorry about this, but Earth's average temperature this week set a new unofficial record high on Thursday, and it was the third time in a week that rated as the hottest on record. Data from the University of Maine's Climate Reanalyzer shows the planetary average hit 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Places like Xinjiang, China checked in at about 110 degrees this week. Antarctica has been running this week about 8 degrees above normal. A cargo ship in New Jersey is burning for a third day at a port in Newark. The fire has claimed the lives of 2 firefighters. It's also exposed gaps in the ability of fire crews to respond to emergencies on container ships. The Coast Guard and other officials are giving an update later today. Employers around the country were pulling back on hiring in June, but still delivered a month of solid gains, adding more than 209,000 jobs. This is a sign the economy's resilience is confounding the Federal Reserve's drive to slow growth and inflation. The hiring figure in June is the smallest in 2.5 years, but does point to a durable labor market.
This week on Science Friday. Believe it or not, this beautiful music came from a plastic violin. How and why a violinist designed a $7 3D printed violin. Plus, listening in on the largest tree on Earth, the aspen named Pando, all on Science Friday from WNYC Studios.
That's this afternoon at 1 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago.
This is Aisha Roscoe with NPR. That extra car that you don't really use, that car could be worth hundreds of dollars in support or more as a donation. Think about it.
Find out how at WBEZ.org/car. WBEZ is supported by the Illinois Department of Health Care and Family Services. Automatic renewals for Medicaid customers have ended. Renewal letters will be mailed. More on renewal dates and address updates at abe.illinois.gov.
So sports later today, the Cubs are playing the Yankees in New York just after 6 o'clock, then 7:10 start. The White Sox hosting the Cardinals. Sky tipping off against the Atlanta Dream at 7. And later, the Red Stars are playing the Dash in Houston. The Fire hosting Nashville tomorrow. Sunny skies and a high of 82. This is WBEZ.
This is Reset. I'm Patrick Smith in for Sasha-Ann Simons, and we're back with more of our weekly news recap, giving you a closer look at the week's top stories across Chicago and Illinois. Before the break, we looked at the record rains that flooded basements and put a damper on NASCAR's downtown street race, which made Jacoby happy, I guess. But we've still got more news to cover. With me are Brandon Pope, reporter and anchor at CW26 and host of WBEZ's Making podcast, Hannah Meisel, state government and politics reporter for Capital News Illinois, and Jacoby Cochran, host of the daily podcast and newsletter, CityCast Chicago. Don't forget that you can also watch the weekly news recap right now on the WBEZ Facebook and WBEZ YouTube pages. Let's turn to politics. Mayor Brandon Johnson, although I'm also coming to you, Brandon. Mayor Johnson is shaking things up. Brandon, what's going on with the Chicago Board of Education?
It's going to happen a lot. Brandon Pope, Brandon Johnson, it's going to happen. So, Chicago Board of Education, this is actually the last iteration of an appointed school board before we get to the elected over in 2025, 21-member board. And Brandon Johnson did almost a complete clear out when it comes to getting his own Board of Education, replacing all but one. Past years, he had a lot of lawyers and bankers, consultants, stuff like that. Johnson, he favors more activists, more the grassroots sector, community organizers, nonprofit sector. And the biggest point to Johnson after in a statement he released was he takes a lot of pride in these being CPS parents. He put a lot of value and weight on that. Their new school board president is, and please excuse my pronunciation, Jianan Shi, 33 years old, worked since 2019 as the executive director of a parent advocacy group called Raise Your Hand for Illinois Public Education. And then Elizabeth Todd Breland, she's the holdover. She's the board vice president. She's the carryover from Lightfoot's era. She's at the University of Illinois, Chicago as a history professor. And she's one of the more progressive people on this board as well. So it's going to be interesting. Once again, the last fully appointed one. And they face a lot of daunting issues. I mean, education, it's a beast. I mean, you got a fiscal cliff looming here, about $628 million. Academic progress after COVID is a big thing swirling.
Moratorium on school closures is coming up.
Yes, aging buildings, enrollment declines,
lead pipes.
I mean,
we're back at it.
You add more and more to it. It's not going to be an easy task for any of these board members to handle, and they're going to take a brunt of the blame for a lot of things that come with it. So we're going to have to see what they can put together, and if Johnson put together a team that can make any sort of dents in these major issues we're seeing here.
And I do think it's important to point out Mayor Johnson is not the first mayor to do this sort of major change at the school board. Rahm Emanuel replaced most of the board when he came into office. Hannah, I want to turn to you. Former Republican gubernatorial candidate Darren Bailey is back in the news. What's he up to?
Well, Darren Bailey, who in November he lost pretty immediately when polls closed to Governor J.B. Pritzker. The ultra-conservative Republican announced on his farm at an event on the 4th of July in the evening that he would be challenging Congressman Mike Bost for Illinois' 12th district down. It covers a lot of, southern Illinois, which this is a really big geographic district, but of course, an area that has lost a lot of population in the last, several decades. Darren Bailey is... it's an extension of the campaign he's been running for honestly years, because he started campaigning for governor when he rose to prominence in the early months of 2020, or early COVID rather, when he sued to temporarily get out from under Governor Pritzker's statewide stay-at-home order. And since then, he has been running this, kind of crusade, you could say. And Mike Bost, who has been in Congress for the better part of a decade, he definitely has the GOP establishment, but Darren Bailey, a person who seems to have enjoyed the spotlight, and he doesn't want to give that up.
So staying with you, Hannah, a long chapter in Chicago's history of political patronage has come to a close, really, with almost no fanfare. Remind us about the more than half-century-old Shackman decree, and tell us what happened in a courtroom yesterday.
Right. So to understand what the Shackman decree is, we have to go back to the 1960s, the height of the power of former legendary Mayor Richard J. Daley, who built this Chicago machine. Of course, Chicago machine is nothing necessarily unique. In Tammany Hall, New York City, they had Tammany Hall. But the Chicago machine has kind of endured in a number of ways, if for no other reason, just the legend of it, the aesthetic, the contention that hiring anywhere in Cook County, Chicago, Illinois politics is always political. Now, the Shackman decree, Michael Shackman was this activist lawyer in his 20s. In 1969, he sued to get city halls, political hiring kind of monitored by a court. And since then, lots of departments in Chicago, Cook County, the state of Illinois, they also came under their own Shackman decrees. But in the last decade or so, lots of offices have gotten out from under the court monitors to, prevent this political patronage. And last year, when Governor J.B. Pritzker appealed to the Seventh Circuit, basically they said, yeah, it's been decades and decades. It's time. You have to comply with these certain things to prove that you are, no longer in the era of patronage hiring. But according to that, precedent, Karen Yarborough's office has, they appealed, and here they are on Thursday, finally, the last office in Cook County, Chicago, Illinois, to get out from under their own Shackman decree.
Yeah, I mean, the judge said, Clerk Yarborough's office is not exactly a model of hiring, but the standards have been lowered, so you guys are, we shouldn't have this case last anymore. I'm going to make like a NASCAR driver, maybe about to drive into some tires. I'm going to try to make a real tight turn here and say that a Peoria-based initiative to get used ambulances and other emergency vehicles to help the Ukraine war effort continues to get both national and local donations. Peoria Hospital executive Chris Manson started the organization U.S. Ambulances for Ukraine in March of last year. With a new shipment that went out this week, they will have delivered 51 ambulances, 8 fire engines, and 5 SUVs to Ukraine. I mean, it's just amazing what people can accomplish when they come together, right?
It really is. That's actually quite unbelievable.
It is. So that's my remarkable story of the week. I want to hear what stories stuck with you all this week that we haven't talked about. Maybe they surprised you. You thought they were underreported. Brandon, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it just actually dropped today. Northwestern football coach Pat Fitzgerald, the hazing investigation that's been ongoing for a while. I've kind of forgot it was happening. He got suspended for 2 weeks, which feels like a slap on the wrist. 2 weeks, no pay, and it starts, I believe, tomorrow, so before the football season. So it seems like it's kind of a whimper, and move on to the football season. They're going to lose some games, and that's Northwestern for you.
Jacoby?
An episode from CityCast Chicago dropped this week featuring legendary Chicago roller skater Sweet Tea, a.k.a. Teresa Farrell, a.k.a. my mother. And we learn all about why has roller skating been such a cultural gem for Chicago's black communities since she was 2 years old.
Yeah.
Can I ask, does the good news song, is that only for the CityCast podcast, or can we get some for our
What do you
listeners
mean?
here?
Some good news. I got you.
Hannah, what about you?
Oh, gosh. Well, now I'm...
do you have a really adorable story about your mom you want to share?
I know that she's listening, and I always have adorable stories about my mom, but I hate to be a downer. I want to highlight that it's been 100 days since Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershwitz has been locked up in Russia, even though he's committed no crime. And press freedom around the world, we are... here in the United States, the frustrations that we have had as reporters pale in comparison to what journalists experience in countries around the world that have much less press freedom. In fact, every year there are journalists who are murdered and, for their cause, for trying to reveal the truth about what is happening in their city and their nation.
Yeah, press freedom is what makes this recap possible. I really appreciate you bringing that story up so that people can be reminded of this, of what's going on in Russia and the importance to bring Evan home. We got about a minute here, so 10 seconds for each person. What are you looking forward to this week? I'm going to go the other direction. Hannah, you go.
Oh, God, it is a beautiful weekend. I think the humidity has temporarily lifted, and I don't mind it hot. I love the hot weather, but I think it'll be nice to get some good respite, good breezes going, and hopefully enjoy the weekend.
Yeah.
Cherry Mountain Arts over on 836 North Milwaukee is having a Joe Fresh Goods, King Rello, Chicago Everything archive sale. Right. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I think I might pull up.
You gonna be right in line?
I mean, I got my Rello shirt on right now, my Joe Fresh Goods hat on. So, yeah, I'm excited for the sale.
Way to rep. All right. Hey, Chicago Sky play tonight, 7 o'clock. They've had a lot of upheaval with James Wade's exit, so let's see how they carry forward and see if they can be competitive and push for the playoffs.
Is this the first game for the new coach?
This is the, I believe, second or third. But,
okay.
It's going to be interesting to see how they move forward as they try to figure out, do we get a GM, a head coach? What are we going to do?
Yeah. I was talking to Marquita, who's like our biggest Sky fan, and she said she's not mad at James Wade. If you get your opportunity, you got to take it.
I'm not really either. I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
All right,
exactly.
That is it for the weekly news recap. My thanks to Jacoby Cochran of CityCast Chicago, Hannah Meisel of Capital News Illinois, and Brandon Pope of CW26 and WBEZ's Making podcast. Thank you all so much.
Thanks
for having us.
Great to be here.
Have a great weekend, everybody. That's it for Reset. The show is produced by Meha Ahmad, Stephanie Kim, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Micah Yason, Claire Hyman, Michael Liptrot, Andrea Guthman, Andrew Merriweather, and Nadia Hernandez. Dan Tucker is our executive producer. Ethan Schwab, Deshaun Smith, and Haley Bloomquist were our engineers this week. Monday on the show, we'll check in with a panel of women leaders in the Chicago area about ageism and gender bias in the workplace. I'm Patrick Smith. It's been a pleasure filling in for Sasha-Ann Simons over the last few days. Sasha, thankfully for all of you, we'll be back next week. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great weekend.
It is 12:58. I'm Lisa Labas. Good afternoon. You're listening to 91.5 WBEZ. Next on Science Friday, a professional violinist wants to give kids 3D printed violins to help cut the cost. Instruments can be very expensive. We'll hear about 3D printed violins coming up next on Science Friday.
Violence erupted across France after the fatal police shooting of a teen. President Macron has in part blamed video games for the clashes, and he's not the first world leader to use this widely debunked theory.
Whatever may be going on in France, whatever violence is occurring, it certainly is not due to violence in video games.
That story on All Things Considered from NPR News.
This afternoon, beginning at 3 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago.
12:59, WBEZ is supported by your membership, also by Lollapalooza, returning August 3rd through the 6th. 4 days of live music with performances from Kendrick Lamar, Billie Eilish, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and more. 4-day tickets are available now at lala.com.